welcome to Nitesh Priyadashi. He sportingly jumped in to replace Pradeep, and if I can, on behalf of Pradeep, present his apologies for not being here. I think he's got a meeting without coffee and biscuits somewhere. With a degree in anthropology and an MBA, Nitesh previously worked for Nielsen before his 15 years with Unilever. He's worked in Morocco, Brazil, and India before basing in Singapore. With him is Dan Foreman, who's the director of Borderless Access, specializing in emerging technologies, and Doshant Gupta, also from Borderless Access. Thank you, Borderless Access, for sponsoring the lunch, proving that there is such a thing as a free lunch. To explore deliberate lying, please welcome all three of them.
Great. Do we deliberately lie? Sometimes yes, and sometimes no. We see in research a lot that we deliberately lie. We overclaim things. We claim certain brand usage. We claim a frequency of usage. And sometimes that's deliberate because we want to present a better image of ourselves. I may tell you that this is a tailor-made suit because I want to project a certain image of wealth, of achievement. I may also tell you that because I've remembered it wrong. I actually bought it at a cheap retailer, Asda. George, this is actually a very cheap suit. But it's rare that I'll volunteer that information. So sometimes we will project an image deliberately which is not true. What we're going to share with you is a comparison of some claimed behavior which is collected through survey information and then some passively collected data from a passive meter. And you'll see that sometimes there are some contrasts. Sometimes it's deliberate and sometimes it's involuntary. I'll frame a little bit of that, and then Dushyant will go through and share some of the outputs, and Nitesh will talk about what that means for organizations such as Unilever. I think it's very well documented and very well researched that we are poor witnesses to our own behavior and also often to others. But some of what we believe can sometimes be so far from the truth that it's staggering. And I've deliberately chose here believe, not some of what we claim, because sometimes we're conscious of claiming an untruth, but what we believe. And sometimes what we believe is not the truth at all. So that poses the question around a lot of the survey-based data that we collect. And we'll touch a little bit upon whether the truth is more important or less important than the perceived reality. Both are important. At Borderless Access, we collect all sorts of information through online surveys, through mobile surveys, and we're able very simply to compare the kind of responses we get by a number of markets. So here's just an example of some of the passive information that we can collect. First thing you'll see is that when people are completing online surveys, there's some differences across regions. Also, there's some differences when people are completing mobile surveys. But perhaps what's most striking here is that you'll see that, in general, people answer online surveys at a very different time of day than when they're answering mobile surveys. Now, what does that mean? I don't really know the answer, but what I do know is that when people are filling in an online survey, and then they're filling in a series of identical questions on a mobile survey, the context is different. There's been a shift of maybe a day or 8 hours. And during that time, they will have been exposed to different brands, they would have consumed different products. And that means, of course, that the context within which they're answering the survey data is different, of course. Some other interesting, fun facts that we've discovered through the passive data collection that we have. We charge our phones a couple of times a day. Maybe that's not so surprising. People, on average, I think this room's a bit different because a lot of people are constantly staring down. But on average, we're unlocking our smartphone a huge amount of time. Now, what does that mean? Of course, that gives any brand, any company, an enormous opportunity to engage with people through the front of screen. Perhaps surprising again for this sort of audience 2/3 of people don't download apps. They have what comes hard-coded on their phone. So this is the broad agenda we're following. So a little bit more about lying. Some familiar examples. Of course, you know the answer to this question. Are they of the same color? Yes, they are. Now, some of you are smart in the room, and you can see they are, in fact, the same color. But for a lot of people, we're seeing different colors because our brains are distorting what we see. So when we answer and say, no, they're different, that's an involuntary lie. There's an even more familiar example around the lines. But when seeing this for the first time, you do, of course, perceive them as different. So our brain can play tricks on us. What about a 40-minute survey? In fact, we discussed with an unnamed client yesterday that sometimes they lie too when they are asking us to pitch for things, and they say, it's a 30-minute survey, knowing full well it's going to take an hour. But if they say an hour, they know it's going to be expensive. So our clients lie too, sometimes voluntarily. And of course, we know this too. So we unintentionally bore respondents. Perhaps no surprise either, that of course we'll all say, you can have what you want when I die. Or if you need to borrow certain parts of me to help someone, it's a good idea until you have to do it. So there's all sorts of psychological theory around why people lie, but we simplify this to involuntary lying and voluntary lying. And what that means for research is that sometimes people lie because what we're presenting them with and what we're asking them to do is a bit boring, or it's too long, it's unengaging, etc. But even when we've produced a great survey, a really good piece of research, we involuntarily lie. Some of that is biases of memory. Some of it is because what we believe to be true is not actually true. And Dushyant's going to share some of the surprises around the belief and the actual truth, the reality.
Thanks, Dan. I thought Dan will explain the different biases because he being a bachelor of psychology, he will give us a whole lot of gyan about what all those fancy words meant. To give you a background about why did we do this research. Borderless Access, a server research company, traditionally now changing its mode into more technology research company. We behaved like a brand because we were trying to engage with our panelists, customers, and we wanted to ensure that we get the most out of the engagement. We want our panelists to do more surveys. We want our panelists to stay in the panel for a longer time. We wanted to reduce the panel fatigue, panel dropout rates. We wanted people to be engaged with the survey process. So in the zeal or challenge to unlock the customer engagement, we tried different methods. We tried the survey method. We did our own research. We tried to look at their behavior in terms of what they do in a typical 24 hours a day, what they do on their Facebook, on Twitter. So we kind of looked into their world and tried to understand how we can use methods, marketing methods, to engage with our panelists. In that, we had our panelists download an on-device meter, which is basically a recorder of whatever they're doing on their smartphones, an opt-in method. And we, surprisingly, the data showed a huge load of learnings for even a brand like Unilever. So having given the background, I'll show you the approach that we followed for this particular research and research. About 1,000 people were surveyed across 6 markets, India, Indonesia being in the Asian region, Brazil, Mexico in the Latin American region, and Turkey and South Africa in the other parts of the world. Each one of these panelists had an Android smartphone. They opted into an on-device meter, which was constantly running on their phone. And the demographics were, typical demographics that any research would follow. 18 to 55 years old, male, female, top 15 cities or regions of the country. And one key thing was additional in terms of our screening. All of these were engaged panelists. And the definition of engaged was using the best of class standards that every panel company or research company follows to define that these people are identifiable, genuine, authentic, they are verified in terms of third-party solutions available in the market. Plus, they had certain characteristics that made them involved with the survey process. We knew that these people are honest, they don't cheat the system, they are not gamers, and they are partly stakeholders in terms of giving us the data project on project, year on year. We ensured the survey was not more than 10 minutes. Straightforward survey. We asked about what kind of mobile brand they have, what kind of network they have on their phone, what kind of OS. We asked about what kind of apps they have downloaded, how many times they have interacted with those apps in terms of number of activities and the total time spent. We also asked about stuff that they do with their phone, right? As soon as you wake up, what do you do with your phone? When you go to sleep, what do you do with your phone? How many photos do you have in your phone? How much memory do you, have on your phone, and how much do you use? And things like how many times do you charge your phone? So pretty much a straightforward survey which would not tax the consumer's mind. Made the research slightly more interesting, where we asked one set of respondents the questions in a 30-day context. So we said, in the last 30 days, how much have apps you have used? A similar set of respondents were asked for 7 days in terms of their usage. And the third set was more recent, what did you do yesterday kind of a thing. And we even made the research more interesting by having one set of respondents see their response as a visual aid. Because people are talking about numbers, they are talking about minutes. Okay, I spent 25 minutes on WhatsApp, for example. Now, in the subsequent questions, we showed them the visual cues about what they had responded earlier. And another set without any cues. So people had to think on their own, convert, do the maths, and then enter the data in the survey. Now for the results. As then mentioned earlier, some of the inaccuracies are so staggering that we had to go back and recheck the data and understand why this is happening. And we've got answers for some of the questions, but some of it is involuntary lying. So here goes. How many people in this room know their phone brand? I'm sure 100%. But the results showed that when people claim in the survey process, and when compared that data with the meter data, which is passive recording of their phone brands, there is about 30% discrepancies. Digging deep into this phenomena, we figured out that this is actually not involuntary lying. This is voluntary lying. Why? Because people who own relatively cheaper phone brands are trying to project that they have Samsungs and iPhones of the world, right? But it still gives us a staggering 30% number who say something else but have something else. People were able to identify the operating system. Of course, we did only Android here. Network provider. Most of the people, again, we feel, don't manage their network providers or their monthly billings directly. So it is done by somebody else in the family, and hence the discrepancy. Going on to the total time they spent on mobile phones. A staggering number of 87% people overclaim the usage. So when we checked with their meter data, and this is FaceTime, right? It is not apps running in the background. This is the time that people spend when they are interacting with their phone, just about 1.5 hours on an average across these 6 markets. And in the survey, when we had asked them, okay, how much time do you spend on your phone in a day? 5 hours. And if we plot the entire population, they're overclaiming by a huge margin. Moving on, when we asked about the total app activity that you've done, as Dan mentioned, 65% of people don't even download their apps. The remaining 30%, when we asked about, okay, you've played with your apps, you've downloaded apps, because you are doing the stuff on your own, you would fairly know what you're downloading and what you're using. The inaccuracies, the red bars, jumped up to 61%. So 2/3 of the population don't know what kind of apps they have on their phone, how much time they're spending on their apps, and what exact apps they have in terms of. So the third chart basically represents app by activity. We asked about WhatsApp, Facebook, Angry Birds, Twitter, and these are the inaccuracies that we found out. So it was not all dark. We had some, light in the end of the tunnel. Remember, in the survey process, we had asked about people to relate the 30-day usage versus a more recent 3-day usage. The accuracies actually jumped up. And as you can see, the numbers, 36% of accurate people jumped up to 43% of accurate people. Similarly for app use. Which kind of alludes to a finding that we will present in the later part of the presentation. Now we looked into the specific app usage, and clearly we try to understand how many people are correctly able to identify their usage. WhatsApp, by a fair margin, came across as the single most used app, and as many times as 9 times a day, people are engaging with WhatsApp. And look at the accuracy levels. People are able to identify almost everybody in the sense of research, able to identify how many times they have used the app and how much time they have spent on the app. Versus other apps which are relatively low in use, for example, e-commerce app, people don't spend that much time. It is an important app, people use it, but they don't spend that much time on the phone for that app, and the accuracy levels go down to as low as 11%. What is the context of Unilever here? So I'd like to invite now my colleague for today, Hitesh, who will talk about how a big brand like Unilever is trying to tackle this problem.
Thanks, Dushyant. Before we start, I just wanted to give you an example of 2 deliberate lies. So there was the deliberate lie in the invite that Pradeep is going to stand here to ensure that most of you turn up. But the truth is that you have to do with somebody more intellectually challenged than Pradeep, which is in me here. But the fact of the matter is that Pradeep could not make it at the last moment, so apologies for he not being here. The second deliberate lie is that you are all expecting the research results from Unilever to be shown, because so there could be some bit of corporate spying in terms of what results we got. But we definitely not shared. The idea was to show how we are using it, the technology, and not exactly what we got the results as. Yeah. So now coming to, obviously from a Unilever point of view, when you look at, or any FMCG point of view, when you think about, this is what we would like to happen. When people get up in the morning and you ask them, what's the first thing that you would like to do? People will talk about toothbrush, tea, because we have a product to fit in every place. And they're saying that. So when you ask them, what's the first thing that you do when you actually get up in the morning, they say, oh, we brush our teeth, or we have a bed tea. But that's not the reality. The first thing that they're doing is about, talking about Facebook and, all the technology which is just at an arm's length, or probably not even an arm's length, with under the pillow, which they pick up to be able to interacting with it. So in terms of sheer mind space, we are fighting with, what people think that they should be doing first thing in the morning versus what they're actually doing. And there's an opportunity there. It's not really a challenge because the mindset is occupied, but there's definitely an opportunity that if they're picking up technology, how do we get the products placed there before it even goes to their bathroom, or to their kitchen for a tea. And I think that's something which is very critical. Now, so therefore you have anyway seen the power of how passive, data collection or kind of metering that Borderlegs team was talking about can help us to reach that and identify for very targeting, which is much more specific and much more at the right moment, at the right time, and in moment and always on kind of thing. Now, there are a couple of things from a context of research which I just wanted to highlight, which is in an attempt to uncover the truth, we often forget that there is something called belief and perception, which is equally critical. Because many a times what consumer does is not does based on truth, but does based on what she or he believes and perceives, and that makes kind of the hand going out to pick the right brand or the right product. So therefore, while it's important to know the truth, it's equally important to make sure that you are aware of what she is claiming to be, because the claim is again very important in the social context that she is talking about. It's equally important to know what she perceives or believes to be correct, factual. Well, it may not be fact, and then you come up with a strategy based on all the three realities. So therefore, if the question was, which I think Dan started with, if one research or the other is the answer, I mean, my personal belief is it's not, because if you don't know what she is claiming, if you don't know what she believes, and if you don't know what the truth is, somewhere you would absolutely miss in targeting the ways you should be into getting to buy your product. So this is where the entire journey begins. And that's what basically is a challenge as a marketeer, that when you are introducing the brand in the digital world, while mobile metered panel could be one relevant way for every instance and product, how do you understand in a totality? And that's something very critical. But this is not all, because just think about the reverse cycle. Think about a reverse cycle where you get to know the truth first, yeah? And this is happening, almost people, probably somebody sitting next to you is already doing it. So there's a guy who's walking up to the office feeling sad because he's dragging himself to the office, and an inbuilt device in his body, or even a phone which is close to his chest, or tells him that you are sad, therefore you need a Ben & Jerry to kind of, there's a time for Ben & Jerry. And the Ben & Jerry pops up on his inbuilt device on the body and says that, okay, time for a Ben & Jerry. So the truth is that the technology has figured it out that he's sad because of his palpitation or perspiration. There's enough way, I can have a full session on that. And then it tells you that, okay, time for a Ben & Jerry, and there is a Ben & Jerry, available at arm's distance at 50% the cost, or 20% the cost, or even 50% premium, because he's anyway sad and he would pay for it, yeah. So that is something which then connects that, and that's something where the truth then triggers the belief and the perception, then which triggers the claim that I want an ice cream now, yeah. And that's something where the reverse thing would happen, and that's not very far off, yeah. So that's where we are all going towards, and if all of us are not really geared towards it, we'll miss the bus sooner or later, yeah. That's what I wanted to say. But the fact is, which is also a great fact, because we're talking about truth and, lie and fact. If nothing of this works, if nothing of these works to get to the truth, one thing definitely works, and this is a bottle of vodka. So get a consumer a bottle of vodka, and you will get all the truth that you're wanting from him or her. But there is a disclaimer that you will need to check with SOMAR and make sure that you put the disclaimer, because I'm not sure if you're allowed to do this when you're getting any things. I would just hand it over to Dan for some last thoughts.
Thank you. Just some really simple recaps. We posed this question earlier. What does this mean? We don't have the answer, but clearly there's a difference if I'm answering a survey as soon as I arrive in the office or when I just leave. That's something that we all need to consider and reflect upon. Likewise, if people voluntarily or involuntarily make claims about their phone brand, and we know that's not true, then why should we believe anything else? Nitesh touched upon that sometimes the claim or the belief is just as important as the truth, but we need to figure out when the combination of them is most important, or when one of them should be prioritized. Again, if people are incapable of clearly explaining how they use a device, something they interact with 110 times a day, why on earth should we believe them about something else, any category, any brand usage? And we always ask questions like this: past behavior. It's very tough for us to recall anything over any sort of period of time. We see that the closer we get towards the in the moment that we often talk about and hear, this reinforces that point, that in the moment is really key, because that's when we've got a really good chance of accurately recalling. So we're poor witnesses to our own behavior. Survey-based data is very good at helping us interpret what we see in the passive data. Sure, we sometimes deliberately lie, and consciously so, but there's other times that we don't, because we believe something which may not be true, but that belief is as important as the truth. So we welcome any questions.
Yeah, this is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I still use Pear soap after 65 years. Any questions before we have some fresh air, or coffee rather? Great.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. My name is Ying, I'm from Vision Critical, and I'm just curious, did you find any differences by country? Which countries were more likely to lie compared to others?
Don't answer that question.
So yes, definitely there were differences in terms of regions. Within countries, there were differences between demographics, and there's tons of data to analyze, right? And idea is there are findings that we want to use for obviously other researchers. We want to come back again for the 2 conferences for MRMW, but we will be able to give you a lot more details, because it will take a lot of time for us to tell you the differences. Just like in survey response, right? India behaves differently when responding to surveys on mobile versus online. Latin America behaves completely different. So there are definitely cultural impacts in terms of how people react to meter and respond to surveys. Not just regions, demographics, type of device, whether you are using a high-end phone versus a low-end phone, socioeconomic classifications. So the entire the background where we talk about differences because of A, B, C factors, they were seen in this particular case as well.
Okay, anyway. Could you please say who you are and where you're from before you speak? You did, sir. Thank you very much for reminding me. I got scolded
Hello,
then. Any more
I'm
questions?
Anila from ItStats Research. I have 2 questions. The first thing is that you said that you use the on-device passive meter for collection of data. I just had this thought that some of this is fairly personal data, so does the ISOMAR have any specific guidelines? Do you need any special permissions before you can collect and disperse this data? Because intuitively, while it's great, I think some of it may be at odds with consumer privacy, etc.
Sure. So if you have, I'll try to answer first and obviously give to Isomar. So if you have a smartphone and you try to download any app, Android will show you the list of things that they will do, right? And there are some other operating systems which won't tell you, but they will do a lot of stuff, around metering. There are guidelines which obviously we follow in terms of telling the respondent or panelist very clearly what's going to happen. So creating that awareness is the first thing that we do, right? Telling them exactly what will be captured. This is what it will be used for. Just like any other survey process, survey data, or qualitative research, or focus group discussion, we inform our panelists very, very clearly what's going to happen. In the perspective of the industry body, I'll let Dan answer that.
Yeah, there are very clear guidelines on it. And it's all around informed consent. And there's an entire group put together specifically to address some of the concerns which can be raised when doing mobile data collection and also passive data collection. There are a number of those committee members in the room, including Guy. And so it's been signed off and endorsed by many of the major providers of mobile technology and solutions, also endorsed by Unilever, who's a corporate member of SMR. So they also, everyone within the CMI team follow the SMR guidelines. But it's quite interesting to think about informed consent, because the very definition of what we're talking about here is we're collecting information that some people don't even know about themselves. So informed consent is perhaps something that needs modernizing itself, because if we don't know what we're now revealing to you, then of course we can't consent. But the general privacy rules and guidelines that operate globally are around this notion of informed consent. and we're very buttoned down in terms of privacy.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think if we may, should we have coffee? Or one more, I'm getting a finger over there. One or two? One more question.
Hi, my name's Mark Shubridge, I'm from Binu. I'm interested to know what the uninstall rate of the passive monitor was over what period, and if it was significant or not.
So, very good question, because if we were to do metering outside of a panel, right, the dropout rate would be phenomenal. It would be as high as 80–90%. But because these people already are part of our panel process, and when I explain the engaged panelists, they understand the survey process. They are they are involved in terms of the reason why they're taking the survey. The participation rate as well as continuation rate is as high as 60–70%. Of course, there are differences by market, but we have seen clear differences when we do a metering to a non-panelist versus a panelist. There are such differences there.
Okay. May we have coffee? Yes.
And
Thank
again,
you very
any questions
much.
we are here outside,
Excellent.
please come and ask any questions about the research that you have.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Exciting to meet you. Nice to see you. Okay, well done. Good. Good, great. Thanks, mate.